Welcome to Small Ball. So nice to be here on a Wednesday. Again, welcome. And of course, notify the world that we're live. But we are live back on Small Ball. Special guest coming on at 4 o'clock. Good friend of the show, Linus Lawrence, will be joining us today to talk some. Well, you know what? I'm not going to give it away. You'll just have to stick around and find out. So as I hear notify the world that we're live, again, thank you for joining me. Now, again, I alluded last show to a more consistent schedule that we're going to try to follow. I think generally speaking, that's going to be a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule with sprinkled in a couple of weekend shows, probably one of the 2 days each weekend, or something along those lines. So again, I'm going to here notify the world that we're live so that everybody knows to come and join us on Small Ball. But you, my viewers, do not need to know that because you already have tuned in to this wonderful broadcast. I'm going to start today's show with this. A lot to talk about today. So here we go. In every sport, there seems to be one position that's just a little bit more impactful, shall we say, than others. And I think you kind of know what I'm getting at here. In baseball, of course, we have discussed on Small Ball that is the catcher position. And while teams have won titles with less than ideal catching situations, it's much more rare than you might think, without really analyzing it. In today's day and age, or really any day and age that I've ever really analyzed, to not have a highly productive, tangibly and intangibly defensive, primarily catcher, but hopefully well-rounded as well, it's not going to serve you well if you're trying to win titles, okay? And in every sport, if a contending team has a glaring hole, particularly at the most important position, a team that feels like they have a roster excluding that most important position, that is a force to be reckoned with, that can contend for titles, it makes all the more sense to try to fill that hole with a similarly talented piece. And somehow, over the last 3 seasons, the Yankees have been one of the better rosters, if not the best, all-around roster in Major League Baseball. And I have said on this show a couple times, no matter how much talent you have up and down the 25-man line roster, I should say, with a glaring weakness at catcher, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to win a championship. I've been proven right about that this year and the past year, when the Yankees, I thought, had, after acquiring Garrett Cole, the most talent of any team. And yet, were bounced by, I thought, a clearly inferior Tampa Bay squad. It's clear that Gary Sanchez needs to go. But the weird thing about it, because in every sport we have these instances where the most important player on the team is not getting the job done and he gets replaced. But for a contending team, there's a high standard. There's a pretty high standard. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers thought that they had the roster to win a title, but a glaring weakness at quarterback. They added the greatest football player in American history. the Yankees have a glaring weakness at catcher. And they are not replacing, but supplementing with Robinson Chirinos. That's their most recent signing. So what the Yankees have been doing, rather than moving off Sanchez and filling that hole with a talent representative of the rest of your contending roster, or their contending roster, I should say, they have tried to supplement the catching position with, you really can't say anything more than bad catchers. Robinson Chirinos is the most recent of those acquisitions. And it broke headlines the other day when the Yankees picked him up. And of course, as always, when your team or any team makes a free agent acquisition, you jump right to the stats. How did he do last year? Well, Robinson Chirinos had a 162 batting average last year. Now, you would say that's not quite the free agent acquisition a team would be hoping for, but that's 15 points higher than the 147 batting average of Gary Sanchez. So think about that for a second. The Yankees just acquired a guy who hit 162 last year, which is better than what they already have. That sounds to me like a position that needs a replacement. Robinson Chirinos is not a replacement. If they were looking for a player of that caliber to replace Gary Sanchez, they would be comfortable with Kyle Higashioka, or a year back, they would have retained Austin Romo. That's not what they're looking for. So by bringing in Robinson Chirinos as a safety net, in case Sanchez has another year, a third or maybe even fourth year of complete garbage production, there's a safety net there to pick the next best catcher available, whether that's Higashioka, Chirinos, or the three other, Chirinos type catchers they have picked up to fill that role, like a Josh Tolley, for example, who didn't even sniff the major league roster last year. So rather than replacing that weakness, this is a contending team, mind you. Okay, this is not the Kansas City Royals. They're supplementing bad play with more bad play in the hopes that one of them will be adequate. But what the Yankees are telling us by signing Robinson Chirinos is that they expect to have star production from Gary Sanchez. If that was not the case, they would be bringing in much higher levels of talent to fill that role than Robinson Chirinos. And to expect star levels of play from Gary Sanchez, in my estimation, is ludicrous. Let me ask you a question. Would you say that Chris Davis, with a C, Chris Davis, not Chris Davis with a K, Chris Davis with a C, is a good Major League Baseball player right now? I'll give you a couple moments to think about that. You probably don't need too many. You would likely say no. Okay? Would you say that Gary Sanchez is a good Major League Baseball player right now? A lot of you would say no. Some of you would say yes. And your basis for that, if you say yes, as far as I understand it, is that a couple of years back, he showed signs of greatness. But my argument to you is Chris Davis in 2013 was third in MVP voting with 1,004 OPS, 286 batting average, 138 RBIs, which led Major League Baseball, and 53 home runs, which also led Major League Baseball. So you guys have been telling me, well, he has shown elite levels of power in his career, Gary Sanchez, this is. Thus, he has the ability to return to that form. So Chris Davis is only 5 years removed from leading the league in home runs with 47 in 2015. Gary Sanchez is 4 years removed now during this upcoming season from when he had his breakout year that all of you keep reminding me of. So who's to say that Chris Davis is not going to return to that form? Well, that sounds ludicrous, and it is, because he's not returning to that form. He's not a good baseball player at this moment in time, and I don't expect him to be in the future. That's how I feel about Gary Sanchez. None of you want to look at him as a baseball player. You just want to look at the numbers. And in that season, I told you guys that these numbers are not representative of what he is going to do in the future. Some players get better from their rookie year. Some players get worse. A lot of you think it's completely random. It's not. You can tell. And I could tell that Sanchez was headed in the latter direction. So if the Yankees want to win championships, or one championship, they need to replace Gary Sanchez, not supplement him with other bad catchers in case he does badly, which is what they did last year, hoping that he would return to form and didn't, and were stuck platooning him and Kyle Higashioka in the playoffs. No disrespect to Kyle Higashioka, but that is not a championship-level catcher. They need to find one quickly before the rest of their roster and talent goes away. Because right now, they don't have their Brady. They don't have their LeBron. They don't have a catcher, the most important position that can win a championship. And it's the one thing they're missing. And relative to some of the other teams who are looking for things, it's not that hard to find. Over the last 3 years, there have been multiple catchers of that level that would be adequate or better to win a championship on the free agent market and the trade market. And they are still stuck in the past, hoping that Sanchez will return to form. Hoping doesn't really, hoping is not a recipe for success in the front office of a major league team. I can understand it, but I'll ask you, what is the difference between Gary Sanchez and Chris Davis? Now, we have a guest with us today, tuning into the show to give us his insights, as he often does here on Small Ball, is Mr. Linus Lawrence. Linus, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today, my good sir?
I'm doing well. It's good to be back on the show.
Of course. Now, Linus, I have a couple questions for you. I want to ask you some things because, I've been talking on this show a lot about Trevor Bauer over the last couple of months, and especially since he signed. And essentially my primary argument on, I think it was Saturday, I want to say, was that the Dodgers gave every other NL team a chance to win the pennant when they came to terms with Trevor Bauer. Now, you, Linus, are a lifelong Mets fan, and another one of my arguments was that the Mets dodged a bullet here. It's my understanding that you feel differently. From a Mets fan's perspective, first, what are your initial thoughts on the Mets failing to add Trevor Bauer?
Well, I think that at the time that it happened, it was sort of it was a very dramatic end to the free agency. It wasn't like most free agencies where, a reporter tweets out, this person has signed with this team. It was a lot of rumors, some that seemed to be sort of promoted by Bauer and Luba. There was the false Bob Nightingale tweet that he was going to the Mets. There was the false leak on his site that had signed Mets gear and stuff. So it made it a bit more disappointing when he didn't sign ultimately with the Mets. I think it's sort of two-sided. On the one hand, it I think that Trevor Bauer is going to have an amazing couple of years with the Dodgers. I don't think that the last year was a fluke like some people think it was. I think that he is here to stay as this form of Trevor Bauer. I don't think he's going to have a 1.7 ERA every year or whatever he had, but I think he will be a Cy Young contender, perhaps Cy Young winner for the coming years. But from a Mets standpoint, I don't think it's the end of the world as they missed out on him by any means. It was a lot of money to pay, and signing him probably would have meant that they would not be able to sign Lindor and Conforto, and definitely would not be able to sign Lindor and Conforto and Syndergaard to extensions, who are sort of some of their players who will be leaving in free agency after the coming season if they don't extend them. So I don't think that it's the worst thing to have happened to the Mets. I think the way it happened was kind of painful as a Mets fan, and I think that Trevor Bauer will be everything that he wants himself to be. I think that he will be a top-tier ace for, I guess it's hard to be an ace on the Dodgers, but he will be a fantastic pitcher. And the fact the Mets don't have him is not the end of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I almost feel like it's more of an emotional thing than a talent, issue for the Mets, right? I would feel kind of slighted in a way with all that transpired. But now let's shift to the other side.
To also, be clear that it was emotional in the sense that you think about that pitching rotation that could have been with DeGrom, Bauer, Carrasco, Stroman, Peterson until Syndergaard gets back. I mean, that would have been the best rotation in the NL, I would argue. But it wasn't necessarily emotional from a personality perspective. I mean, Bauer has his positives and negatives that come with him, it seems, in the clubhouse. Obviously, I'm not a baseball player, so I can't, speculate on exactly. I can only speculate on exactly what that might be. But I mean, we've known about some controversies in the past between him and surrounding his personality. So maybe it wouldn't have worked out if he had come here. I don't know.
Yeah. Linus, so I've been critical of the Dodgers for various reasons. Following this signing, I felt like before this signing, they were as close to a lock as you can be to win a pennant. And afterwards, I think that gets complicated, and certainly they have added talent. And I think that, I don't necessarily think they're going to benefit. What do you think the impact of Trevor Bauer on the Dodgers is going to be? And do you think that they're a better team today than they were 2 weeks ago?
Oh, well, I mean, absolutely, because not only did they sign Bauer, but they also signed, Justin Turner. I think that the Dodgers are, to me, the clear favorites to win not just the NL West, but to win the National League. I think that their starting rotation is the best in baseball and has the potential to be one of the best starting rotations that the game has seen in a while. I mean, it's hard to argue that, Kershaw, Buehler, Bauer, Dustin May, David Price, probably forgetting someone. It's hard to argue that is, one of the best rotations we've seen in a decade. So I think that the Dodgers are, for me, the clear-cut favorites to win the National League, honestly. I think that they are I think they've gotten better this offseason after, being the one seed in the playoffs and winning the World Series. So it should scare everybody. If Bauer had gone to the Mets, it wouldn't have affected baseball, I don't think, the way that this does, because Bauer going to the Dodgers makes it more difficult for everyone who was competing for a championship to do that. It makes it harder for the Yankees. If they make the World Series, they might have to face the Dodgers. It makes it harder for the Braves, who might have to face the Dodgers. It makes it harder for the Padres, who are trying to compete with the Dodgers for the West. So I think that basically 29 out of the 30 teams in baseball were very unhappy to see that happen.
That's a good point. I think, definitely there's a lot to be said about the impact of this signing on the game at large. Let's stay on the Padres for a second, Linus. Assuming the Dodgers got a whole lot better after this move, do the Padres have any chance in your eyes, of winning the NL West?
I mean, I think they certainly have a chance. They're a fantastic team. I definitely think that it makes the moves they made earlier in the offseason seem even more impressive to me, because it's like, yeah, you really, the fact they made those moves really helps them stay in that conversation. Because, I mean, that rotation with Darvish and Snell and Lamet, and I know they have some prospects like Gore who could come up. I think they're definitely they still have a chance, but it just makes it far less likely. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think they're certainly still the number one contender for the wild card, without a doubt. But I think the Dodgers are just it's hard for me to have any concrete points I can go on that the Padres have a better chance of winning that division than the Dodgers, or even an equal chance. I think it's looking more like the Dodgers are the clear-cut favorites.
I'd like to actually switch gears a little bit, because you raised an interesting point that I talked about in my last show. Assuming the Padres are in line for the number one wild card spot, and assuming there are 2 wild card teams this year, between all of those NL East teams, I assume, 3 of them, maybe 4, can contend for that second spot. And between,
I'd argue it could be all 5. I mean, people don't give the Marlins enough credit, but they had a really good year last year.
I think the Nationals are the worst team in that division by a significant amount. I said that on my show the other day.
I don't know if I agree with that. That's interesting. I mean, that division is really stacked. I mean, I know the Dakota projections heavily favor the Mets to win the division. They put the Braves, I believe, at 4th, which is, really? I mean, I don't think anyone believes that. But, or I forget whether it was 3rd or 4th. They have them at like 82 to 84 wins. I think the Braves are still the clear favorites in that division for me. I think that the Mets are close, maybe a little bit behind the Braves. I think the Braves have, with the re-signing of Ozuna, they still have that team, or basically all of that team from last year intact. I know they have some pitching prospects who they're sort of expecting to continue developing. They're getting Soroka back, I believe. I think that the Nationals and the Phillies, those are just two question marks, honestly, because for the Nationals, it's, can you bounce back from last year and return to 2019 form? And they did have a pretty good offseason, I think. I know that they got, I believe, John Lester. They got Bell from the Pirates. It was just a really solid offseason for them, I thought. And they also got Schwarber. And then with the Phillies, I mean, I feel like every year I'm the one who's singing the Phillies song. Last year I thought that they were going to win the NL East, actually. Because I think they still have a lot of potential. I mean, they still have Harper. They still have JT Realmuto. They still have, what's his name? Reese Hoskins. They have a pretty good lineup. I mean, Alec Bohm did very well last year. I believe they re-signed Didi. And, I mean, Aaron Nola is still there anchoring that rotation. So if some of the bullpen pieces that they've gotten this offseason can sort of get the job done for them, I think that they're still a pretty big threat in that division. So it's hard to say, but I would say that the Mets probably have the edge on the second wild card spot, which I think is a pretty common consensus. I mean, with the offseason they had one of the best offenses in baseball last year. It was really just starting pitching that was a massive problem for them, and they've certainly gone out and acquired some quality starters this year.
Yeah, and the bullpen. I would say they need to shore up the bullpen a little bit, to contend, really. But to close out, I want to. So if we take into consideration all of those great teams and the Cardinals adding Nolan Arenado, the Reds, of course, now losing Trevor Bauer, are they no longer a contender? And if not, where do they go from here? Do they have to tear it down, or what's their next course of action?
I think the Cardinals probably have the edge on the NL Central right now. If I had to pick one of those teams, and I think that I'm a believer in sort of once you get into the playoffs, it's a little bit of a crapshoot, honestly. I mean, they still have a pretty good starting rotation. They have Flaherty, obviously. They have Michaelis. They have Wainwright, I believe, and I might be wrong about this. I think they're getting Carlos Martinez back. And, getting Goldschmidt, getting Arenado. You now have Arenado and Goldschmidt at the corners. They have a lot of other really good quality players. And I mean, they had a good year last year, and obviously they made the CS in 2019, so I think it's pretty hard to count them out. Do I think that they have a better chance of making the World Series than the Mets, Braves, Dodgers, or Padres? No. But I think that once you get into the playoffs, anything can really happen, especially if you have good pitching. I mean, no one expected the 2019 Nationals to really do anything in the playoffs, but they just rode those three starters, all the way to the end, basically, and they got some bullpen arms getting hot at the right time. So if the timing works out for them and their pitchers are doing well, I think anything can happen in the postseason if they get there. But I wouldn't put my money on them making it past any of those other teams.
Now, if I'm a Reds fan, I'm not feeling too good about things because Bauer is there for 1.5 years, right? Not exactly, a free agent destination, nor a storied franchise over the last 20 to 30 years. Coupled with that, young players that are not quite panning out the way they hoped, and a manager in David Bell who I don't think is setting them on the right track. What do you do if you are in charge of that organization? Because I don't see that a path for them to the playoffs this year. And some of these young guys between Senzel and Aquino and, a lot of the pitchers that they're having, Castillo's been a little banged up, are just not panning out. Garrett as well. So what do they do? Do they hang on to these guys? Do they trade all of their veteran pieces like Moustakas? What's their plan? What do you do if you're the Reds?
Well, I think I'm a little more optimistic about the Reds than you are. I mean, I think they still have a lot of really good guys on that roster. Obviously, Senzel. I mean, you still have Sonny Gray and Luis Castillo, even though you lost Bauer, which was hard. They got Sean Doolittle. They still have Michael Lorenzen. They have Amir Garrett, who is always fun. And I think they still have some good guys in that lineup, even though they do have some aging guys. I mean, Votto, Moustakas. I think that they have a chance. I mean, the Central, who knows this year with the Central? I could see basically any team other than the Pirates, I think, could go in there because there's basically a void right now in the Central where anyone can sort of take charge. So I'm not quite as pessimistic as you are. I think that the Reds still have a pretty solid shot to do things this year, even though it seemed like last year was their best chance. I still think that they have a fine chance. I mean, it's just all about how they play. But if they don't succeed this year, especially if the Cardinals or another team wins the division, it seems like they might have control over the division for several years. Then I think it might be time to go into rebuild mode. But right now, while it's still unclear sort of who owns this division, there's no team that looks like it's about to, start a NL Central dynasty, then I think that, why not keep it together? If they were in the West and they had the Dodgers, or if they were in, if it was a few years ago and they were in the AL West and they had the Astros, then I'd probably be saying rebuild. But given that we don't exactly know which team the division belongs to right now, I'd say why not go for it?
Yeah, a lot of good points. A lot of good points for sure. I think that this National League is as interesting as I've ever seen it. I'm very excited to have a 162-game season again to see how all this plays out because there are going to be some very, very talented teams who are not playing post-September. So, Linus, thanks again so much for coming on the show today. Always appreciate your thoughts. Hopefully we can arrange for you to make another stop on Small Ball in the near future.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Have a good one, Linus.
All right, see ya.
Peace. Linus Lawrence, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Yeah, I'm not even going to attempt to try to give my thoughts on who's going to make the playoffs yet. I need to give that a lot of thought, especially in the NL, because this is as complicated and frankly as interesting and exciting an NL or even an MLB as far as teams that can make the playoffs that I can remember. So certainly a lot to look forward to this year. And kind of on that topic, with all these teams getting better, and I think, we're starting to see through some of these teams that the prime of a Major League Baseball player is a lot younger than it once was. And the Chicago Cubs are in a tricky spot right now because they don't really have a lot of reinforcements coming up. Maybe, Miguel Amaya, as far as, catching goes, is probably the only real prospect that they are really excited about. And they're an aging team. Jake Arrieta coming back is sort of symbolic of, I think, just what they are, because they're not dynamic. I mean, we kind of saw that in the playoffs. I predicted that they would lose to the Marlins, even though I thought they had more talent than the Marlins, but the Marlins just had so much more energy, right? More dynamic roster. And I mean, David Ross did a decent job as a first-year manager, but it was a pretty stagnant culture and environment in the Windy City last year, and especially with the White Sox across town on such a steep incline right now, resembling a team with a lot of energy and playing with a lot of passion. And the Cubs just kind of look like the Cardinals almost of last year, where it's some aging talent, and there isn't really a lot coming up to replace it. And I think the Cardinals have more. And of course, now with the addition of Arenado, I don't see a way for the Cubs to add a player of Arenado's caliber, just because they don't really have the resources in the farm system, and they don't have players at the major league level who are of that value, right? Because a couple of years back, if they had seen sort of this, I don't want to say decline, because they're still a playoff team. Last year they were, but coming into 2021, I think there are way too many strong teams that they just can't compete with. So Bryant and Rizzo and Baez, and these are guys that they could have gotten boatloads for individually, and, let alone together. A couple of years back. But at this point in time, with Baez declining and Rizzo still very good but aging, and Bryant up and down, and Contreras, very, very questionable what he brings to the table, in trade discussions, I'm not sure what you do if you're the Cubs. And I think rookie manager, or I guess now second-year manager David Ross, I wouldn't be surprised to see them really tear it down and let him grow with a young team and rebuild, because I don't see a path for them to get talented enough to compete with some of these teams that we just mentioned. And I think, a team like the Marlins last year, of course in short season, but the Giants as well, both of those teams, I think, very undermanned, in terms of talent. But the passion and energy that they played with, earned the Marlins a playoff spot, and the Giants, very, very close to it. So you're able to, make things happen and play above your heads with that sort of a culture. And the Cubs don't really have the ability to do that. They're just getting too old. They're getting too stagnant. They've had essentially the same roster since they won the championship in 2016. And I think Jake Arrieta coming back is sort of symbolic that, rather than trying to hang on to that, they really need to move on. And I think at this point it's a little bit too late to get better. I think they have to get worse before they get better, and replenish that farm system, right? Because a lot of the guys that have come up for them did not pan out. Hoerner, I think, remains to be seen. I think he's definitely talented. David Bote, Albert Almora. These are guys that, are solid, pieces, but they really need to replenish, where those holes are in the farm system. And they have some veteran guys that they'll be able to do that with, but the longer they hang on to them, the less value they're going to be able to get. And I don't see a path for this team as constructed right now with Bryant, Rizzo, Baez, Contreras to win a title. And I think it's really difficult to find that path. So I think if I'm the Cubs, you got to just be honest with yourselves, right? And understand that you can't hang on to this team forever. And at some point, you're going to have to tear it down. And there really isn't an instance, I don't think, where waiting to do that is going to be beneficial. So if I'm the Cubs, when I'm looking at all these teams, even in division, right, with the Cardinals getting significantly better this offseason, the Reds are maybe even less talented, but just have so much more energy. They're younger, right? They're building a better culture, and the Cubs are kind of just slowly diminishing in talent and, sort of that passionate environment that they had in 2016 that was able to help them win a championship. They don't have that anymore. So if I'm the Cubs and I see all these other teams around me getting better, I think the time is now to tear it down. And it worked for them a couple years back. It won them a title. They had one of the more popular rebuilds, right? It was a long one. It was a tough one. So I think they might be, afraid of that in a way. But I think the longer they hang on to these guys, the longer their rebuild will have to be following that. So if I'm the Cubs, I think, there are some difficult decisions that have to be made, especially coming off a season in which they made the playoffs, but getting, losing to the Marlins, swept by the Marlins in that wild card series is not a good sign of things to come. To close out the show today, I have a realization. There's a pattern here on Small Ball. I think we see this a lot. I think of things as I'm, brushing my teeth, playing some video games, doing homework. A thought will occur to me, and I decide I got to talk about it on Small Ball. The Dodgers won the championship last season. But I came to a realization. Prior to winning the championship last year, they had not won since 1988. Okay? The Los Angeles Dodgers are one of the most storied, historic franchises in all of professional sports. They're thought of, when I think of the Dodgers, the way people are talking about them now in the media is that they're finally, after last season, getting over the hump and breaking through, because the narrative is that they are a masterfully run organization that has run into some bad luck in recent history. And I came to the realization, I think it was today, that that's entirely inaccurate. The Dodgers are not an elitely run organization in professional sports. And I'll give you a few examples. Prior to last season, they had not won since 1988. Okay? That's 32 years. In between championships. That's a very long time. That is a very long time for an elite organization. They have 7 titles, okay, which is good, not outstanding, but very good. 32 years between titles. That is like 6 generations of players. right? And, if you think about a player's prime being like 5-6 years, maybe that's like 6 generations of players in their prime. That's a long time for an elite franchise to go without a title. I mean, people have been talking about the Yankees drought, since 2009. That's 11 years now. Okay. 32 is almost 3 times that. And yet the Dodgers have been dealt bad luck, or just things haven't gone their way. And as a result, they had not won a championship in 32 years. Now they have. But what separates the great franchises from the bad ones, and you guys know who they are, right? You know who the good ones are and the bad ones are. And it always just seems to work out, right? The New York Knicks, no matter how much talent they bring in, no matter who they draft, it doesn't seem to work out. It's not a coincidence, and you all know that, okay? Likewise, the Patriots, last 20 years, right, have not drafted well, have not really attracted big-name free agents, but they make it work. And they have 6 championships in that span. The Dodgers are not a comparable franchise to the Patriots over the last 20 years. They're not. And I don't think they're particularly well run because they don't follow the recipe for success in professional sports. It's pretty simple. Now that players' primes are younger than they've ever been, the recipe has become draft and groom and produce good young players in the early stages of their prime and find a veteran leader, put that together, and you get a championship. It's pretty simple. Take the Tampa Bay Lightning, for example. They've been developing a great young core, but they haven't been able to get over the hump, right? 2019, number 1 seed in the league, come into the playoffs, get swept by the 8 seed Blue Jackets. Last year, won a title. The only difference was the addition back from injury of Steven Stamkos, who did not even play well or even adequately. He was arguably the worst skater on that team. But he, their captain, veteran Hall of Fame level player in his prime, was back from injury, and that was the ticket. That was the key to their success. Take teams like the Lakers, the Heat, big markets, LA, Miami, storied franchises. I know the Lakers won in 2010, but both of these teams had been developing young cores. Until LeBron got there, nothing to speak of. Take the Bucks, for example. Think about how young that core is with Devin White and Tristan Wirfs. All of a sudden, they add that piece, Brady, and they prove everyone wrong. The Dodgers have had that young core for a while. They finally add that piece, which is Mookie Betts, and it works. But until that point, and it seems like they're now going back on that strategy with the addition of Bauer, collection of talent, to that point, let's say 19, 18, 17, 16, consistently underperforming in the postseason. Why? Because they're not following that recipe for success, and they haven't up until 2020 for 32 years. They think they can outsmart teams. They think that they can use analytics to find 23, 4, and 5-year-old hitters that can just hit the ball farther than everybody else. And they were wrong. It didn't work in the postseason. So they're not a well-run organization. They're not. It seems like there's one organization in each of the 4 major sports, if not a couple more, that are consistently good but not great. And they're all in big markets. Take the New York Rangers, for example. They haven't won a title since 1994. Before that, 1940. So one championship since 1941. That's 80 years. Almost never bad. Why? Huge market, huge fan base, free agent destination, but they're not well run enough to win a title because they're not able to add that X factor player. Forget about talent. Yes, LeBron's talented. Yes, Mookie Betts is talented, and that helps a lot. But there are other guys of similar talent that aren't able to add that juice. LeBron comes to the Miami Heat. All of a sudden, title. 2 titles. Comes to the Lakers. Lakers had been developing a young core. They needed that X factor. And in those instances, it's very obvious. Adding LeBron James. Very obvious that that's a recipe for success. But in baseball, the Dodgers have been adding these players and developing these players, but have never had until this year that X factor. And the addition of Bauer signals to me that they're interested in Betts for his talent and not his leadership abilities. Because if they were, then they would be satisfied with keeping what they have and grooming their young guys and becoming even better. But they weren't. They wanted to add more talent at the expense of their culture. Take the Chicago Bulls. Since Michael Jordan left, always good, never great. Huge market, free agent destination, huge basketball city. Struggling last couple of years maybe, but for the most part, very good, not great. And in football, it's pretty obvious. The Dodgers are the Dallas Cowboys of baseball. So many similarities here. I think poor front office, continuing to get in their own way by adding too many complications to the locker room, desperate to continue to add talent when you underperform in the postseason. Both teams have done that. They underperform, fans get upset. They say, who can we get that can hit the ball far, or whatever the comparison would be in football, depending on the position. Run really fast, hit really hard. Who can we add? Yet, there's never really an emphasis on how can we use the talent that we have, continue to groom it, but add a veteran leadership piece that will finally crack the code. Neither team had been able to do that until the addition of Mookie Betts, and it seems like they did that by accident. They were interested in his talent, which is quite high, not so much his leadership abilities. It doesn't seem like they care. If they cared, it wouldn't have taken them this long. The Dodgers and Cowboys are very comparable. Cowboys have 5 titles, which is, fairly comparable to 7, as far as the proportions in those sports. And over the last 25 years, until this year with the Dodgers, consistently disappointing their fan bases, being very good, but not great. So I don't think the Dodgers are a storied, or they're certainly storied. I don't think they're a well-run organization. And they have so much talent right now that they're making up for it. And the addition of Mookie Betts is the ticket they needed. Had they added a very similar player without those leadership qualities, they'd still be in this drought and situation that they've been in for 32 years, in my opinion. So yes, they have a lot of talent, and their talent is making the front office look very good right now. But should some of those players not work out, should some of those players opt to leave, should the Dodgers fail to afford all of those players when they leave arbitration, I don't think they're well run enough to compensate for that. And of course, that's down the road, and a lot of time and stuff remains to be seen in that department. But I made that realization today. I felt like I wanted to talk about it. Let's not kid ourselves about the Dodgers front office, is the moral of this story. They're supremely talented, and they're making the front office look a lot better than they are. But I don't think that the Dodgers are a elite front office in professional sports. They are extremely comparable to the Dallas Cowboys, who it's hard to argue at this point in time are elitely run as far as the front office. Thank you for watching Small Ball. Good show today. We've been having longer shows. I mean, I used to do an hour. I cut it down to half an hour. But recently, we've been kind of in that more 45 to 50-minute range. Let me know your thoughts on that. I'm good with either. I can talk for 5 hours if you guys want me to. There's just so much to discuss. So let me know. I'm fine with whatever you want me to do, and as far as time. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But thank you so much for watching. Any comments, questions, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys and girls. I love getting comments and talking about them. If you want any Small Ball merchandise, potentially, DM the Small Ball Instagram. We can accommodate for that. We can have custom stuff done, and we'll definitely take care of any of your requests in that regard. Other than that, like, subscribe, comment, recommend, all that good stuff if you feel inclined to do so, and have a healthy, happy, and safe rest of your Wednesday. My best guess would be Friday for our next show. I think that's a pretty good bet, I would say, for our next edition of Small Ball. So be on the lookout for that. Not sure exactly what time. Probably similar, I would say, maybe in the 4 o'clock range, kind of, late afternoon. But again, also let me know your thoughts. I'm open to suggestions. So thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed today's show. Big thanks to Linus Lawrence for joining us. And have a great rest of your Wednesday. Stay safe, happy, healthy, all that good stuff. And we'll be back probably Friday is my best guess. So be on the lookout for that. And I hope you enjoy. Have a good one. Take care. Peace.